Hello, everyone. I've given this video a rather audacious title, What the Bible Really Says About the Future, ? Now, I certainly want to be and claim to be an academic, and I don't know any academic that would claim to make a video that would start with what the Bible really says about anything. Because the answer clearly is the Bible says all sorts of things about everything. But that's the title, What the Bible Really Says About the Future. This is number 11 in the ongoing series that I began a few weeks ago, titled basically Ideas and Views of Death, Afterlife, and the Future in the Ancient Western World. So that's a real marquee right there. And we're up to number 11. And before I move on past the biblical material, past early Christianity and forms of ancient Judaism in the time of Jesus and Paul and other early Christians, I wanted to give a little bit of an overview or a summary. So where am I getting this title? Some of you know this already if you watched the very first video. There's a story behind it. This is the title page and also the opening of a chapter I wrote in a book years ago. And I'll give you the backstory on that again because it's kind of interesting, I think, what the Bible really says. And then you can see this whole list of topics. Capital punishment, the future, that was me. Government, marriage and divorce, miracles, segregation, slavery, war, wealth, wisdom, women, the world. And it was published by Prometheus Press. You can see the editors here. You'll know the name probably if you have followed the field of ancient Judaism and early Christianity, if you followed any of my work. Morton Smith, who's now passed away, and Joseph Hoffman, who's a very active scholar to this day. So they were the editors, and what they did is they reached out to various scholars. This was in 1988. I was teaching at the College of William and Mary, and I was just getting ready to move to UNC Charlotte, where I ended up teaching for 33 years. I retired last year. I might add, I think I'm as active now as I've ever been, but I've broadened my classroom, you might say, to the world, so to speak, certainly the YouTube world, and all kinds of lectures and videos and films and so forth that I've done over the years anyway, but really focusing on that in the last year or so, given this YouTube channel in particular. So how did this come about? I got a phone call. I'll never forget, I was standing in my kitchen at my house when I was a professor at the College of William and Mary. It was one of those kitchen phones. I forget the color of it, but I hope it wasn't yellow. I don't think it was, given the taste of my wife. But I picked it up, and it was Morton Smith calling me at home. He had my home number. Now, I had had dealings with Professor Smith. He's Columbia University. He had helped me a great deal with my dissertation back in the 70s. This was now a decade later. And over the years, I saw him at different conferences. And I would say that we were certainly colleagues and associates, but I would even say personal friends. I feel like I knew him fairly well. I will say this, when he read my dissertation, he wasn't on the committee. I got my PhD at the University of Chicago, and I did work under a Smith, but not Morton, Jonathan Z. Smith, the great and unfortunately late, also passed away not too long ago. If you know names at Chicago, you would know Eliade. Well, Jonathan Smith was younger than Eliade, but very, very much up and coming and a very different kind of historian of religions. He was also dean of the College of Humanities at the University of Chicago. So he had a very broad humanities background. I worked in the humanities, in the College of Humanities, or I think it's called the Division of Humanities. The college is the undergraduate part of that. And not the divinity school, although everyone who worked in religion took courses from the divinity school as well. Lots of universities have this sort of setup where you have the university as well as a divinity school. You think of Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and so forth. So Chicago also has that, but very much academic across the board. Now, so Smith and I had worked together. When he got the draft of my dissertation, the first draft typed out on an electric typewriter with carbon copies, I sent him the carbon copy. He marked it thoroughly with all kinds of helpful suggestions. I remember when he called me on that, he called me on the phone again, and he said, "I'm sending you your dissertation back. I made a lot of notations. I hope you're sitting down when you open it." And that, of course, scared me as a young scholar. What do you mean? Is it bad or good or whatever? Well, it was good. It was all good. But Smith was beyond amazing. I mean, his knowledge of the ancient world and of ancient religions and of Judaism and early Christianity and Hellenized religions and Hellenistic religions in general was just encyclopedic. It reminded me of what I knew of A.D. Nock at Harvard, that kind of repertoire, that kind of breadth, that kind of amazing knowledge. So he was a friend, he was a colleague, he was an associate, and he called and asked me if I could write this chapter. Now, think about this, a book called What the Bible Really Says with these kind of topics. How do you do it in a chapter? And that's what I asked him. I said, well, I'm flattered to be asked and I want to do it, but the future, I mean, the Bible says hundreds of things about the future and they're not all the same. And I said, you probably mean the Apocrypha too, the so-called Apocrypha. It's not a very good name for it, kind of a Protestant name. The books between the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, and maybe other texts as well, but primarily biblical texts. He says, that's it. That's the breadth of what we're covering. And you've got to survey it all. You start with the ancient Near Eastern Hebrew Bible view and just work your way down the pike, as we say. So before I leave the Bible behind, and in this series, of course, I've done more than the Bible. I did a program on ancient Babylonian views, the Gilgamesh epic and that sort of thing. I did one on Homer and ancient Greek views. I did one on ancient Egyptian views. I had a segment on Plato and just Hellenistic Greek ideas in general, but quite a bit on the New Testament. That's basically what I work on, early Christianity. So now we've come to number 11, and before I wave goodbye to what the Bible really says, I want to go over this article with you. Another thing I want to do, let me share the screen and explain why I want to do that, because I think you're going to like hearing this, all of you. Hope you can see that. This is my blog, jamestabor.com. If you ever need to find it, if you can remember my name, you pretty well got it with the .com. And it's got over 500 posts on it. You can see some of the categories up here. But the way to really find something is to use this search feature with keywords. I've done quite a bit on ossuaries and tombs in Herodian Jerusalem, 1st century BC, into the 1st century CE. So if I type here ossuaries and do a search, it's a good search feature. You're going to find, look, all of that material on ossuaries and graffiti, and then you can go back and get older posts and so forth. So that's there. But the reason I called this up is I wanted you to see this. I put this up, just last night. Why would this YouTube video get over 200,000 views? It's the very first one that I did in this series on views of death, afterlife, and the future in the ancient Western world. So let me click on that. And there you can see the title, Death and Afterlife. That's the series, The Ancient Hebrew View. I put this out yesterday because I wanted people to respond to it, and I put a little form here, and people have written me and given me all kinds of suggestions. Because look, for me, 200,000 views, I call it viral. I know for some people, you need 1 million views to be viral. I've never had anything close to that. I think one of my videos has over 500,000, but it's taken over a year to get there. That's kind of a slow virus, I guess. But this was just in a few days, it had 200,000 views, and I think it's just climbing on up. So, but this is the ancient Hebrew view. Why would that be of interest to people? I only asked this question yesterday, and I've gotten a lot of answers. I think the one that made the most sense to me was a person who wrote in and said, I think it might be appealing to the flat earthers because you're saying that the ancient biblical view was a flat earth, and they like that. And here's Dr. Tabor supporting the flat earth view. Well, one of the things I had to say, and I think I put a comment as the first highlighted comment where people could see it. Look, this series that I originally intended 12, I think I'm going to expand it a bit to 14, as I'll explain a little bit later. But this series is not about my ideas about death, afterlife, and the future. I'm not going to say it has nothing to do with me, as if the scholar never brings to topics any kind of presuppositions or assumptions. Of course I do, but it's not about my beliefs. I do have my beliefs about death, afterlife, and the future, but that's not what the series is about. This is history of ideas. The Bible, Plato, Homer, all of the different cultures that I mentioned, Egypt, Babylon, and so forth. So, the Bible is part of that, but the Bible's a big book. And so that has to be broken down into a number of parts, which it was. But why would this have 200,000 views? And then I thought, maybe another reason is I linked a PDF free of charge that everybody could get, this article. So you could get this actual printout and have a copy of it. Compliments of me, and maybe that was the appeal, when you give something like that to people and then you can read it, that could be it. I don't know. Anyway, let me go back to the home page because I want to mention something else. If you go to Tabor Bookshelf, it's a new feature on my blog. I've started doing little blurbs and little highlights of books. And the criteria that I'm using are books that I own, books that I've read, and books that I value. Now, that's going to be hundreds, if not thousands eventually. And I just started this. So if you click on Tabor Bookshelf, highly recommended books, I start with my own, because I do highly recommend my own books. And then this is just beginning. Texts and primary sources, general biblical studies. And there's the book right there, What the Bible Says. And I think this particular edition was the original. Today, I think it's Harper, but I think you can still get this. Here's the link to it, certainly on Amazon. Anyway, and what the Bible really says about the future. So I like the article here as well, I believe, right here. So if you go on down my bookshelf here, I just put this one up yesterday, I think. Ancient Mediterranean Religions and Culture. Alan Siegel, now passed away. A good friend, a colleague. He was so encouraging to me when I was a younger scholar coming along, helping me in so many ways, as Morton Smith did as well. Life After Death, A History of Afterlife in Western Religion. I think it's 880 pages. This is the magnum opus. I mean, my little YouTube series of 12, 13, 14 segments barely, as we say, scratches the surface, much less covers it all. But this is an amazing book. I don't have it here with me to show you, but you've got the link to it here. So if I go back to my home page here, let's see right here. You can see it right there. Links so you could find this very easily. Just go to jamestabor.com and it'll just be there from yesterday, really. So it'll stay on the front page for quite a while till it gets pushed back. That's the nature of a blog. Anyway, so I just want to mention Alan Siegel because I don't claim to be this little article is going to tell you about death and afterlife in the Bible. Yeah, but okay. So let me close that and get out of all of that. And I want to share a different screen with you. And that is the article itself. And what I'm going to do for all of you is I will put the link in this program, which makes sense. It's called What the Bible Really Says About the Future. And I just want to go through as a recap, kind of an overview, because this is the 11th video in this series. And before we leave the Bible, as I said, just a little bit of looking back and a summary, because there clearly is this unfolding development. And I want to give an analysis of how things change and how they've stayed the same. I love that phrase. It can be applied to so many things when you're particularly looking at the history of ideas. There are no new ideas in one sense. This is the old Ecclesiastes idea of chapter 3. There's a time for death and a time for birth, and there's a time for war and a time for peace and so forth. No new thing under the sun. So things are, and then things change and things become, and yet what was also is, and what is to come also was, so that you finally get ideas that are out there in our own time that people just assume, well, that's the Bible. And certainly if you throw in the New Testament and add Jesus and Paul and early Christianity, a huge body of material that we have surveyed that isn't the same as maybe the Hebrew Bible. So let me make this a little larger where you can see it. And I want to actually read this because it sets the tone for what I faced as I sat down to write this article. You got to imagine, Morton Smith has asked me to write a chapter in a book, what the Bible really says about the future, like individual future of the world. Is it apocalyptic? Is it just, what is it? So here's what I said. Look at my first sentence. There's no simple and single response to the question of what the Bible really says about the future. And don't you just love that really says? Because people say the Bible says a lot of things, but I'm going to tell you what it really says. And I mean that. I mean, I want to tell you what it really says, but there's not any simple and single response. What one finds is just what one would expect in a book composed of documents from many times, places, circumstances, and authors, variety and development. There is a lot of both, though by development, I mean here simply change. Evolutionary change is one thing and implies progress, but really evolution just does mean change. All change might not be progress. When we look at world history, there are setbacks, right? If an asteroid hits the Earth and we get a new phase of evolution, I don't know that that's progress. And so just keep that in mind. I mean here simply change. In other words, what was the view of Moses and Abraham in their time according to the text? And of course, I'm going by what the Bible says. My treatment presupposes no particular valuation of the various dreams and schemes regarding the future. So whether you're talking about the individual or the cosmic future of the planet or the universe, I'm trying to be objective and descriptive. This is what scholarship is all about. My approach in this chapter will be mainly chronological, tracing the topic through various periods of history from ancient Israelite down to the Roman period when the final parts of the New Testament were written. I have also roughly divided the topic into two subtopics or two categories: what the Bible says about the future of the world and what it says about the future of the individual. That's what we call afterlife. The two are always interrelated and they often overlap. So then I start with the early Hebrew Bible. So here we go. Now, I'm not going to read this all to you, but in the early Hebrew Bible, I point out mainly the following. First of all, the picture of the cosmos that you saw, actually, I'm going to try highlighting here. I think it'll work. Right here, the picture of the cosmos, and I can make that a little larger and move it over for you. And you'll have a copy of this. It's essentially a three-decked universe. Let's start with this psalm. I love Psalm 115, verse 16 through 18. Here's what it says. The heavens are Yahweh's heaven, or Jehovah, the name of God, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Hashem, if you're Jewish. The heavens belong to the one, the creator. But the earth he's given to the sons of men. And even though that says men, it means human beings. The dead do not praise Yahweh, nor do any that go down into silence. So in the very first video, I talked a lot about this. Sheol, the world of the dead, or the state of the dead, really, the kind of region or realm of the dead. In other words, the realm of being dead is called Sheol. You know, Hades in Greek, I pointed this out in a previous episode or segment, actually means unseen. Isn't that brilliant? Hades. In other words, what happens to the dead? They're not seen. What happens to the dead? Sheol. They're just, you got to ask a question. Now, but we, the living, will bless Yahweh from this time forth and forevermore. So there's your three decks. You saw it in the image that I put up. I'll throw it up on the screen again where you can see it. The canopy of heavens, and even the sun, moon, stars, and all the planets are under that. And if you look up at the sky on any day or any night, it's pretty clear that the flat earthers are right. There it is, the canopy of heaven that goes from one horizon to the other. It is a dome. Anyone can plainly see that. And then the rain comes down and the floods go up and various things happen on the flat earth with the rivers and the lakes. And then that's the arena of the living of human life. So the heavens are Yahweh's heavens. The earth he's given to human beings and to the plants and to the animals and all the things of Genesis 1. Now, that is fundamental to the ancient Hebrew view. So the dead know not anything, as one of the Psalms says. Here you go right here into some of those passages. Part of understanding the idea of the dead in Hebrew thought is to understand a single Hebrew word, nephesh, literally to breathe, a breather. And a nefesh chaya is a living breather. You can have a dead nephesh, that is a creature that once breathed and now it doesn't breathe anymore, but it's still a breather. It's a dead breather. In my translation of Genesis, I'll put a picture of it up for you. The transparent English Bible or version, it's only the book of Genesis so far, but it's part of the transparent English Bible. I try to translate these things more literally in that sense. So I translate nefesh chaya as a living breather. The thing that many people don't understand is when we read in Genesis 2, verse 6, when humans are created, the creature Adam, he's a living breather, just the same term in Hebrew. as used for insects and land animals, and every creature that lives on oxygen is a living breather. And the plants are not breathing, as we would even say today, but taking in carbon dioxide rather than oxygen. So Genesis 2:6, God breathed into Adam's nostrils the breath of life. Now, what people do, because it's Adam, the man, they want to make that unique, as if the breath of life wouldn't be what every land animal has, what insects have, what amoeba even have, that is taking in oxygen and breathing out the components of respiration. Not necessarily with lungs, fish take it in through the gills, but any oxygen-based creature, carbon-based oxygen-breathing creature is a nefesh chaya, and they all have the breath of life. Okay, so breath of life is not a soul, and people read that in the old King James and some of the other translations, and it becomes very sacred. And man became a living soul. So humans have an immortal soul, as if we're going to suddenly jump to much, much later Greek ideas that don't come in for thousands of years. And as far as being part of the Hebrew Bible, they simply are not. So it's animal physical life, it's respiration. Notice here, the dead go down into silence. They don't participate as the living in praising God. We already quoted that one. Death is a one-way street. Look at this passage in Job. It really states it well. Man dies and is laid low. Man breathes his last. And I'm going to just use the male language for sake of simplicity. But whenever we read man, we mean humankind, that is male and female. He created him and them, as Genesis 1:26 says. So humans die. Man dies and is laid low. Man breathes his last. Where is he? That's Sheol, basically. Where is he? As water fails from a lake and a river wastes away and dries up, so man lies down and rises not again. Till the heavens are no more, he will not awake or be roused out of his sleep. The Hebrew metaphor for death, and it goes right into the New Testament, is sleeping. And it is a metaphor, but it's not non-existence. It is non-participation. It means being taken out of the game, being on the bench, so to speak. You're not a player anymore. And if you wake up someday, that would be resurrection. Job doesn't have that hope. He doesn't expect resurrection. And I know there's a passage in Job 19 that everybody thinks says that he does, and I've covered that in previous episodes. If you didn't get that, it's in the last previous segment, number 10, where I talk about tying up loose ends and some caveats, and I cover that passage in Job 19. So anyway, the dead go down to Sheol. There they lie and sleep together, whether good or evil, rich or poor, slave or free. It's described as a region dark and deep, the pit, the land of forgetfulness, cut off from God and human life. Now, that doesn't mean there are no passages in the Hebrew Bible about God filling heaven and earth, and the heavens above, the earth beneath, and even the world of the dead. David writes a psalm, at least he's attributed as the writer, Psalm 139. If I make my bed in Sheol, thou art there. Well, notice it's still, I make my bed in Sheol. The metaphor is still sleep. So the presence of God fills the heavens, the earth, and the whole cosmos in the Hebrew Bible. However, the dead know not anything. Their thoughts perish, and dust you are, and to dust you will return. Now, there is talk about shadows or shades of the dead, and that's exactly the idea. Now, if you listen to all of the segments, you'll realize that that was also the view of the ancient Greeks in the time of Homer, and even before that and after that, until a certain shift came in the Hellenistic period with Empedocles and Plato and other Greek philosophers. So anyway, that's the Hebrew Bible. There is an exception here, and I talk about it also in the previous lecture, so I'm not going to go into it here, but it has to do with a story of a seance that is given where Saul goes to a medium and calls up the dead spirit of Samuel. And how that is to be understood. Can the dead be aroused? Can people talk to the dead or whatever? The text is reflecting seemingly the view that it might be possible. But in the Hebrew Bible, it's not clear, because Isaiah, for example, makes fun of those who try to talk to the dead. And he says, oh, you're listening for peeps and whispers and noises in the night, you know, kind of like things go bump in the night, that sort of idea. And he's making fun of that. And he says, should not people consult the living rather than the dead? That's in, I think, chapter 8 of Isaiah. So that possible seance, I mean, this idea, did he really see Samuel or whatever? I'm not sure what the author's point of view is, but there is that story. It's not an exception. Now, what about the future of the world? That's eschatology. And the future of the world, until you get into later parts of the Hebrew Bible, is this endless cycle of birth and death, and then other generations being born and dying and so forth. Look, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. So that's Ecclesiastes. Also, by the way, it's called Kohelet in the Hebrew Bible, the preacher. That's that famous poem, a generation comes, a generation goes, and the sun also rises. Ernest Hemingway pulled that out. So look at this, though. For the fate of the sons of men, human beings, and the fate of beasts is the same. We think this is one of the later books. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath. That's in Genesis. The breath of life. I talked about that. And man, humans, has no advantage over the beast, for all is vanity. All go to one place, all are from the dust, and all turn to dust again. Adam and Eve are told, you are dust, and to dust you will return. And God breathes into Adam the breath of life, and Adam becomes a living breather. That is the original meaning. Is it depressing? Is it far different from later views of the immortal soul and resurrection of the dead? Yes, it is. But it is what it is. Now, if you start then with Abraham, as I do here, I think I made that too big. You can see that. And you go through Abraham, and actually you could start back with Adam and Enoch and all of the people before the flood, and then Noah and Abraham, and finally you get to Moses, and then all the prophets. Everybody dies. Everybody goes to Sheol. They rest together, and they don't come back. It's a one-way trip. Now, does that ever change? Does it ever get modified? Yes, but we're taking this step by step. It's important to do that if you're going to do historical studies. Some people see this as progressive revelation, but there's an assumption there that the final full truth will come out when we finally get to Jesus, maybe, or Paul. But until then, you know, these primitive people were grappling with ideas and so forth as if it's unfolding. But that would not be the historical view. The historical view would be, this is the view of life and death and afterlife in the ancient Near Eastern world. And it's widespread, and it's the same cross-culturally, as you know, if you listen to those previous videos. Now, then we move ahead. Notice these are major headings. The time of the exile and beyond. Now, I'm jumping all the way to the end of the Hebrew prophets And the exile, there's two exiles. There's one in the 700s BCE, the 8th century, and then one in the 500s BCE, the 6th century. So one is the Assyrian captivity carrying away the northern tribes of Israel, and then the southern Judeans being primarily left, along with perhaps some of the other tribes, but primarily Judah in the south, that the Babylonians conquered in 586. So 721, 586, 587. So the first view of the future was not that people are all going to come back from the dead, and that will be the future. And it is the word eschatological right there, eschatological. It develops over time, and it is an ideal future that's going to come. But it's not in heaven. It's not beyond this world. It's actually here and now in this world, but it's a future, an eschatology. Eschatology means the last things, the end of the age, the end of history. And there develops this idea of this age and the age to come. So that's a huge step, but it doesn't say anything about the dead. Now, there's history is going to go on like a line, a horizontal line, and develop, but the dead are dropping off the line of history. I'll put up an image on the screen for you that I used when we covered this. So all of this has been covered. I'm reviewing here because I want you to get the overview today in this particular presentation. So here's a passage. I think this is from Jeremiah. So Jeremiah, he lived through the Babylonian captivity. At that time, this is, notice in the future, Jerusalem will be called the throne of Yahweh. All the nations will gather to it. They will no more stubbornly follow their own evil heart, and so forth. The days are coming when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he will reign as king. That's the idea of this Davidic Messiah or ruler that's going to come. The days are coming. Notice it's always the days are coming. Sometimes it's in the latter days, but it's always beyond this time, but not in the world to come. It is still this world, but it's a new age or a new era, ERA, or new period of time. Behold, the days are coming, says Yahweh, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and Judah. So the northern, southern kingdoms coming back together. That's all through Jeremiah. Read Jeremiah 30, Jeremiah 31. I will put my laws, that's literally Torah's teachings, within them, and I will write it upon their hearts, and I will be their God, and they will be my people, and I will remember their sin no more. So it's a golden age. It's an ideal age. As we go further, you get the idea that the transformation that's coming is not just cultural and religious and political, but it's kind of cosmic, but it's not leaving the world and going to heaven. It's spoken of as a new creation or a renewed creation, but the meaning is actually that the creation is going to reach some ideal at the end of the age. So here you have the famous scene in Isaiah 11. So this is not every generation being the same with birth and death and birth and death and birth and death. Here you have the wolf will dwell with the lamb, a leopard shall lie down with a kid, a goat, the calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them, and the cow and the bear shall feed, and their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox, and the suckling child shall play over the hole of the asp. And it goes on. Let me pull it over here. And the weaned child, just a little toddler, shall put his hand on the adder's den, a very poisonous creature. And notice, they will not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain. The holy mountain is this New Jerusalem. But again, it's not in heaven. It's presented as the ideal. The nations are coming up. There's world peace and so forth. For the earth will be full of the knowledge of Yahweh as the waters cover the sea. So this is the eschatology of the Hebrew Bible. We don't have to go over all of it that I cover in the article. Okay, so that is the Hebrew Bible. Then, as we move from that and get into the Greco-Roman period, which would be, say, 4th century BCE after the exile, into the 1st century, which would get you into early Christianity, you get these fundamentally transformed views. It's like a whole new world develops. And one of the things that develops is this view, apocalypticism. So it's not just eschatology that someday, somehow, there'll be world peace and the nations will learn the way of God and the Messiah will come and so forth. It's not just a renewed or ideal age. It's actually the idea that the end is very near and there are all kinds of signs, and you'll be able to calculate the end of the age by reading the apocalyptic materials. Just as Christians think of the book of Revelation, if you're looking at the Hebrew Bible, it would be the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel, the most apocalyptic book. And chapters 2, 7, 8, 9, 11, and 12 have all of these visions that people have tried to interpret now for 2,500 years, depending on when some of the material first began to develop, but certainly after the exile. Now, Book of Revelation is very similar. The Book of Revelation is actually built on the visions of Daniel. I think the Book of Revelation could be seen as a recasting in the Roman period of what you had in the Hellenistic period with the Book of Daniel and the post-exilic period, as we call it. But one of the things it does is it starts counting kingdoms: Babylon, Persia, Greece. But as time goes on, Rome gets added, 4 kingdoms. And by the time of Jesus and the New Testament, there's this expectation that Rome is the 4th kingdom. So we have to be in the end, right? We have to be at the end of the age, because Babylon came, Persia came, Greece and Rome. Daniel has this great statue, and the head is gold, that's Babylon. And as you move down, you have a breast and belly of silver. I'll put up an image for you. And then as you go on down, you get bronze and iron and finally clay. This idea, Herodotus says something like this too in Greek tradition, these 4 kingdoms that get more and more inferior. I don't think the Romans would agree with that. So you get all of these kind of scenarios of what's going to happen at the very end of the age. And you know, this is still with us today. I'm going to teach a course in the future called Apocalypticism Through the Ages. That won't be the exact title, but the idea would be end of the world scenarios, end of the world ideas and expectations, all the way back to the book of Daniel, but right down to the time I'm making this video, 2023, and it's going to keep going. If anything, we're going to be going through a heyday of apocalypticism as we have so far in the 20th and 21st centuries, because we live in times that can very easily be described as apocalyptic. Everything from conflicts among nations and famines and disease epidemics and wars, and even the environmental collapse. What essentially happens as you move on down into the 2nd century BC, 1st century BC, 1st century CE, early Christianity, and so forth, is that Greek ideas of the immortality of the soul that go all the way back even before Plato begin to get merged with the Hebrew ideas that we are living breathers. And the idea begins to develop that well, that's just the body. The body dies, yes, but the soul lives forever and has the potential of leaving Hades and going to heaven to be with God or the gods, depending on what culture you're talking about. So the wisdom of Solomon is in the Apocrypha, so-called. It's in a Catholic Bible. It's not really written by Solomon. Nobody thinks it is. We would date it as 1st century BCE. But what's interesting, in chapter 2, it gives the old view. Let me just read it. Here is the old view of everything that I've said up to this point. Short and sorrowful is our life, and there's no remedy when man comes to an end. No one has ever been known to return from Hades, it's using the Greek term, because we were born by mere chance, and thereafter we will be as though we'd never been, because the breath in our nostrils is smoke and reason is a spark. Now, this is not the ancient Hebrew view, because the Hebrews in the Hebrew Bible would say there's a purpose, there's a God. They just don't spell out how that's going to extend to all of humanity once people have died, and does history just go on forever or whatever. Finally developed the idea of resurrection of the dead. So this is more the Epicurean, or maybe even the Sadducean view in the time of, say, Jesus or Paul. So your breath is just like smoke, and your reason, your brain is electrical. It's like a spark, and it's kindled by the beating of the heart. So when the heart stops, the sparking stops of the brain, the breath stops. Is that not a clinical description of death even today? When it is extinguished, the body will turn to ashes. This, in this tradition, cremation, but dust and ashes is the term used in the book of Genesis by Abraham. The spirit will dissolve like empty air. Our name will be forgotten in time, and no one will remember our works. Now, according to the wisdom of Solomon, that's the view of the wicked person. That's the view down to this day of someone who says, look, death is death, life is life. When you pull out the plug, the computer dies. And if you drop the computer on the floor, it's irreparable, it's gone. And if the data gets lost, it's gone. It's not running, it's not conscious, it's gone, to use a familiar analogy from our own time. So, but if you go on in Wisdom of Solomon, the author wants you to believe that's not the case. That's what the wicked say. But what do the righteous believe? The souls of the righteous are in the hand of God, and no torment will ever touch them. In the eyes of the foolish, they seem to have died, and their departure was thought to be an affliction, and their going from us to be their destruction. But they are at peace. For though in the sight of men they were punished, their hope is full of immortality. The author goes on to say that in the time of their visitation, because it still is Jewish, that there's going to come a time when they will shine forth, maybe be resurrected, and they will end up governing and ruling the nations. So that's the essential view. You could call this resurrection of the dead. You also get it in the book of Daniel right here. Those who sleep in the earth will awake. Some will shine like the stars forever, a kind of astral immortality, and others will be condemned and will suffer torment or being cast away. So when you come to the New Testament, things begin to change. What begins to develop among Jewish thinking is resurrection of the dead. Okay, and that's what I began to cover here. Now, in the ancient Hellenistic, let's call it Platonic, or the view of Socrates, I did a whole segment on this, the death of Socrates that Plato writes, you would never bring the body back. Resurrection of the dead invariably refers to the body coming back somehow from the dead. Now, you can discuss what kind of body. Is it a physical resuscitation of a corpse? Is it bones coming together and getting reclothed in flesh? You know, what really is envisioned, because you get a wide variety of views. But in the New Testament, when Jesus and Paul talk about resurrection of the dead, they don't present it as the Greek idea of immortality of the soul. That's Plato, right? That's Socrates. That's most Greek philosophers who believe in the immortality of the soul. And with that goes that whole set of evaluations that we've covered. I'm not going to repeat all that again, but just to summarize it, so that the earth is not the place to be, heaven is the place to be, and what you want to do is leave the body behind, let it go back to the earth where it belongs, because you, the real you, is a soul, an immortal soul, and you go up to heaven to be with the gods or with God, depending on the culture. That's not the view of the New Testament. And so we did a whole segment on resurrection of the dead, and particularly Paul's view of resurrection and how that affects the view of faith in the resurrection of Jesus. I don't intend to even imagine that I could repeat all of that in this summary. But please notice how dense these quotations are getting here, because I'm trying to put it all in to one article. But if you listen to the entire 10 videos that I've done so far, you'll get in-depth treatment of this whole idea. Well, then Christians begin talking about not just resurrection of the dead. And by the way, Jesus and Paul imply a transformed spiritual body, but a body, a reality, not just the soul escaping the body, but the dead coming forth from Sheol, from Hades, and being reclothed. They're naked metaphorically when they're dead, but resurrection is coming forth from the state of being dead. I mean, don't think of it as coming out of the ground or something like that. It's an idea. The dead are dead. They're in the world of silence. They're in Sheol. They're in Hades. They rest. They're sleeping. And then they come forth from that state of being dead, and they're reclothed in a new spiritual body. What will it look like? Remember, Paul says, I can't tell you. It'll be glorious. It'll be immortal. It'll be eternal. It'll be powerful. It'll be the complete opposite of what he calls our lowly body, literally our body of humiliation, which is corruptible, which is rotting away all the time and aging and so forth. It's not an anti-body view, but it's the idea that the physical body is not going to last, but the new spiritual body in which you will be clothed and you will come forth from death will be eternal and be with God and even above angels and so forth. But there's also the close of the age and the eschatology in terms of earliest Christianity. And within the New Testament, we get the signs of the end. So all the way through this article, I try to give you the future of the individual, the future of the world, and how it shifts and shapes as you go through time, with some references to the other cultures, particularly the Hellenistic culture, through which this Hebrew, Jewish, Christian culture passes as we go down through time. Now, in the next segment, we're going to leave this biblical material behind, and we're going to go to the church fathers, as they're usually called. So I've picked the theologian Origen of Alexandria, who is taught by Clement of Alexandria, who is very much a Neoplatonist, but a Christian. So he tries to Christianize Platonic views. Comes out very interesting, as you're going to see. Can't wait to get into that. And then we're going to jump ahead to Augustine, or Augustine, as some people call it, and what he says about the future, because these individuals are more philosophically minded, and they're more aware of Hellenistic ideas and Platonic ideas and Neoplatonic ideas, but they don't want to go into Gnosticism and a kind of negative view of the world, because they believe Genesis, the world is a good place, the physical is good, but they do believe that the soul is immortal and that there will be a resurrection of a body. But here's the thing, as we're going to see, what kind of a body do they have in mind? And it's a complete sea change, I think, from the New Testament, but it becomes the view of Christianity down through the ages. So that's going to be very interesting. So take care, everybody. I think I originally, as I said, I was going to do 12, and this is already 11. But I think I want to go to 14 so that I can do the early Christian views next time. And then I would like 2 segments, not on the ancient world, but I want to still attach them to this series. What does science say, particularly brain science and the latest studies of consciousness and the brain and how it works? and near-death experiences and all kinds of things that people discuss today over against these ancient biblical views, or even these ancient Greek or Greco-Roman views? What do modern scientific views have anything to do with some of this history of ancient ideas? Take care. See you next time.